The galaxy was in a delicate state of peace. No one truly trusted it, but no one truly dared to break it. Either the great factions of the Zenthar Empire, the Xylor Collective, and the Korathi Federation had come to terms with the fact that their uneasy truce was their best hope for survival in a universe filled with unknown threats and hidden dangers. The recent diplomatic efforts had been heralded as the beginning of a golden age, where new alliances would form and prosperity would spread across the stars. But there was one problem: no one had counted on humanity. On the neutral world of Zenthis, where the treaty was to be signed, representatives of the major factions gathered around a massive table carved from the remains of ancient asteroids. The lights above flickered slightly as diplomats and military leaders exchanged pleasantries, their voices a harmonious hum of practiced diplomacy. The air was tense with the weight of what was at stake, but there was something unspoken that had settled over the proceedings. At the far end of the room sat the human delegation represented by Ambassador Erin Caldwell. She was young by the standards of the galaxy's seasoned diplomats, but there was something about her presence that commanded attention. Her piercing eyes seemed to see through the layers of political gamesmanship unfolding around her. She had always been known for her calm demeanor and her sharp mind, but there was a fire within her that few had ever truly understood. The Zenthar Admiral, a towering figure with dark metallic skin, leaned forward as he addressed the assembly, his voice booming and full of authority, yet tinged with a subtle arrogance. He spoke of the importance of unity and the promise of peace, but there was something in the way he spoke of humanity that caused a ripple of discomfort in the room. He dismissed the humans as insignificant players in the grand game of galactic power, calling their species nothing more than a fleeting experiment in the cosmic dance of life. The words were like a slap in the face to Ambassador Caldwell, but she kept her composure. She had been prepared for this moment. The galaxy had always viewed humanity as a fringe species, a young race, with no real place among the stars. They were too new, too volatile, too unpredictable. But Caldwell knew something they did not. She knew humanity was capable of far more than anyone could imagine. She held her tongue as the Admiral continued speaking, unaware of the quiet storm brewing in her heart. She had been calm for too long, but now her patience was beginning to wear thin. The humans had been underestimated for far too long. Their strength, their ingenuity, their adaptability, all written off as primitive traits beneath the notice of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations. As the Admiral finished his speech, and the room buzzed with the usual diplomatic murmurs, Caldwell quietly pressed a button on her comms device and sent a single message back to Earth. It was simple and direct, a reminder to the leaders of her world that they had a power they had yet to unleash. The message read, "Do not forget who we are." At that moment, the galaxy's great powers remained blissfully unaware that they had just ignited something far greater than they could ever have anticipated. They had made the fatal mistake of underestimating humanity, and in doing so they had unknowingly begun the countdown to a new chapter in galactic history, a chapter that would begin with a single question: who had truly made the greatest mistake? Back on Earth, the atmosphere was eerily calm despite the growing unrest, and the galaxy president, Alexei Morrow, stood in the quiet confines of his private office, overlooking the planet's surface. The twinkling lights of major cities far below seemed a stark contrast to the weight of the decisions he had to make. Humanity had always been at the edge of the galaxy's awareness, treated as a curiosity at best and a nuisance at worst. But that was about to change. Caldwell's message had been received, and it carried the weight of a threat not yet realized. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the room's ventilation system as Morrow turned to face his senior advisors, each one a seasoned strategist, each one with a long history of intergalactic diplomacy and military experience. But none of them had ever encountered what lay ahead. They had known that Earth had been developing its military and scientific capabilities for decades, but they hadn't fully grasped the extent of what had been hidden in the deepest recesses of human innovation. A small but powerful group of scientists, engineers, and military tacticians had been working on something extraordinary far from the prying eyes of the galactic community, something they called the Reprisal Protocol. It was a set of weapons and technology so far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen that it defied conventional understanding. It wasn't just about firepower or raw strength. It was about control, a kind of control that allowed humans to manipulate entire star systems at will. Caldwell had known about the protocol for some time. She had been briefed on its potential and its risks. It was humanity's ultimate fail-safe, a response to the growing arrogance of the galaxy's established powers. When Morrow had first authorized its development, it was meant to be a precaution against potential threats, but now, with the Zenthar Admiral's words still echoing in her mind, it was no longer just a precaution, it was a statement. As Morrow briefed his advisors on the steps to initiate the protocol, Caldwell stood by silently, her face unreadable, but her mind was already miles away, already calculating the precise moment to unleash the power of humanity's hidden arsenal. The galaxy had never seen humans at their peak, and now they would learn the hard way not to make such rash assumptions about their place in the cosmos. The plan was set into motion as Earth's highest command ordered the activation of the protocol. In secret, key satellites positioned in the farthest reaches of the solar system began to hum with life-long dormant energy cores, now whirring back into existence. These were not conventional weapons, but mechanisms designed to alter the fabric of space itself. They were capable of disrupting the gravitational and electromagnetic fields of entire star systems, and with a single command they could incapacitate fleets across the galaxy. But Caldwell wasn't ready to strike yet. The message had been sent, but the true power of the reprisal protocol was yet to be realized. She wanted to see the galaxy squirm. She wanted to see the fear begin to spread slowly as strange phenomena began to ripple through the cosmos, as starships found their navigation systems malfunctioning, as communication lines suddenly failed, as systems on once secure planets flickered in and out of existence. It would be enough to raise questions, but not enough to reveal the true source of this chaos, not yet. For now, the galaxy would remain unaware of what was coming, but soon the questions would start. And as the first whispers spread through the farthest reaches of space, the galaxy's uneasy peace would begin to unravel. Humanity's quiet storm had only just begun. Across the galaxy, systems that had once been secure and predictable began to feel the effects of humanity's quiet storm. Strange anomalies crept through the farthest reaches of space. Unnoticed at first, whispers of missing communication signals, unexplainable fluctuations in gravitational fields were dismissed as minor disturbances by the galactic powers, but as more reports came in from the outer sectors, it became clear something was happening. A force beyond their understanding was at work. The first signs were subtle enough to be ignored by most, but impossible to dismiss for those who knew the galaxy's inner workings. Trade routes slowed as ships found themselves inexplicably unable to navigate through certain sectors. Unexplained blackouts occurred on high-security planets, causing temporary chaos and confusion. Fleets began to report erratic behavior from their advanced sensors and navigation systems, but no one could trace the origin of these disruptions. All eyes turned to the unassuming human delegation who had left Zenthis only days before. Ambassador Caldwell sat in her office on Earth, watching the news feed from the galactic capital's reporting systems. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the first signs of panic flicker across the galaxy's official channels. The powers that had dismissed humanity as a footnote were now scrambling to find answers. Something was wrong, and they didn't know why. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, the usual calm was replaced by hushed conversations and subtle glances as more and more reports flooded in. No one was willing to voice the unspoken fear that had begun to take root in the hearts of the galaxy's leaders. No one wanted to say it aloud, but it was on the tip of everyone's tongue. Could it be the humans? Could they be responsible for the chaos now spreading throughout the galaxy? In a secure meeting room aboard a Zenthar dreadnought, Admiral Tarlok of the Zenthar Empire was reviewing the latest reports with his most trusted advisors. The Zenthar had long prided themselves on their superiority, but now they found themselves at the mercy of an unseen enemy. Their fleet's advanced navigation systems had begun to malfunction, and several star systems near their borders had experienced sudden gravitational fluctuations that no one could explain. Tarlok's fist clenched as the realization set in. No one in the galaxy had ever dared challenge the might of the Zenthar. But what if this was different? What if the humans had finally found a way to strike back? Across the room, a Xylor diplomat stood, his arms crossed in frustration. "This is not a coincidence," he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "It is as though someone is testing us, seeing how far they can push us before we break." "Perhaps it is," Tarlok replied grimly, "but we cannot ignore the possibility that this is more than mere coincidence. Perhaps we are dealing with a power we have not fully understood." Meanwhile, the Korathi Federation also began to feel the pressure. Their massive colonies, once secure behind powerful shields, had begun to experience strange disruptions. Entire sectors of their economy slowed to a crawl as communication systems went dark for hours at a time. Military leaders questioned whether their fleets were still operating at full capacity. Their intelligence networks were compromised, and their most advanced ships had begun to malfunction at the most critical moments. But it wasn't just the military systems that were affected. Civilians began to report mysterious power surges across the galaxy's most populated systems. Entire cities on Korathi and Zenfar worlds experienced blackouts, as if the very infrastructure that held the galaxy together was slowly unraveling. The collective fear was palpable. Now whispers were no longer just rumors, they were questions that demanded answers. On Earth, Caldwell watched it all unfold with a calmness that belied the enormity of what had just begun. Her orders had been followed precisely, and the ripple effect had already spread farther than she had anticipated. Humanity's influence was no longer just theoretical, it was real, and the galaxy would soon learn that they had pushed too far. The galaxy had begun to stir in panic. The disruptions that had once been seen as odd coincidences or temporary glitches had now escalated into full-scale chaos. Fleet after fleet reported total navigation failure. Entire sectors of communication systems went dark, and even the most advanced AI-driven technologies began to glitch unpredictably. The mighty Zenfar, proud and technologically superior, found their ships stumbling in the void, unable to communicate with one another. The Xylar Collective, once regarded as the most secure and technologically advanced faction, now watched in horror as their star systems bowled into confusion. The Korathi Federation, with all its military might, had to pull back, afraid of leaving its borders vulnerable to an unknown force that seemed to be everywhere at once. The galaxy, once a vast and orderly expanse, had turned into a web of uncertainty. And there was one thing that united every faction: the overwhelming feeling that someone was behind it all. But who? Back on Earth, Caldwell watched the growing disorder with a quiet satisfaction. She had sent her message, she had made her point, but now it was time to prove the full scope of humanity's power. The reprisal protocol was no longer just a concept, it was a reality, one that had been activated in the deepest recesses of Earth's most secretive military stations. Satellites that had once been silent now hummed with life. Their core energy systems, dormant for years, had reawakened. But these weren't ordinary weapons. They weren't designed to destroy planets or annihilate fleets. They were designed to control the very fabric of space itself. By manipulating gravitational and electromagnetic fields, they could disrupt anything, anywhere. And then, without warning, humanity's presence was felt across the galaxy. The first real strike came when a fleet of human ships, previously thought to be primitive and obsolete, appeared in the Trionic sector, a strategic zone heavily guarded by the Zenfar. They did not engage in open combat. Instead, they simply moved into position, silent and methodical. With a single command, the satellites positioned across the solar system activated, and the Trionic sector plunged into darkness. Ships that had once sailed through the sector with ease were now frozen in place, their systems completely incapacitated. Zenfar vessels floated aimlessly in space, their advanced AI systems unable to respond. Communications failed, navigation faltered, and in the absence of understanding, fear began to spread through the sector. The Zenfar were helpless. Simultaneously, similar strikes were happening elsewhere. The Xylar Collective, renowned for their technological ingenuity, watched as their systems, once thought invulnerable, began to malfunction. Their fleets, once proud and formidable, found themselves trapped in pockets of space, unable to maneuver, unable to communicate with one another. Entire fleets fell into disarray, their crews scrambling to regain control. Their once perfect strategies were now useless against an unseen enemy that knew how to exploit their every weakness. The Korathi Federation, known for its powerful defense networks, was no better off. One by one, key sectors fell victim to unexplained power surges, systems failing at critical moments. Ships, their shields and engines designed to repel even the strongest forces, now buckled under a strange and mysterious pressure that none could understand. What had once been the epitome of strength now seemed fragile and vulnerable. And all the while, humanity remained a silent force. The human ships did not engage in open combat. They did not boast their strength. They simply watched from the shadows, their technology silently reshaping the galaxy. The leaders of the Zentvar, Xylor, and Korathi empires were left to confront a terrifying reality. Humanity was no longer the naive, insignificant species they had once believed. The balance of power was shifting. Slowly, imperceptibly, but with undeniable force. Caldwell's message had been clear. This was only the beginning. The chaos that had gripped the galaxy continued to spiral as the disruptions grew more widespread and uncontrollable. What had initially been dismissed as isolated incidents now formed an undeniable pattern, one that seemed to focus on the very heart of each great empire. Every powerful faction, every fortified system, was left vulnerable to the unseen force that loomed over them. And as the panic set in, one thought began to echo in the halls of every command center, on every council floor, and in the minds of every leader across the stars. Could this be humanity's doing? The first cracks in the galaxy's collective facade were small, almost imperceptible. But soon, the unease began to show in the faces of the once proud leaders of the Zentvar, the Xylor, and the Korathi. Warships, their proud symbols of power, now floated helplessly in space, their once formidable crews unable to regain control. Communications networks designed to ensure smooth governance and strategic dominance now flickered and failed as if some unseen hand were twisting their wires. The control they once held was slipping away. The Zentvar Empire's Supreme Council convened in urgent deliberation, their faces etched with concern. Admiral Tarlok, their most respected military strategist, stood at the head of the room, his fingers clenched into a fist as he surveyed the damage reports. His fleet, once unmatched, had suffered critical losses in the Trionyx sector. No weapons had been fired. No enemy ships had attacked. The fleets had simply stopped, disabled, paralyzed by an unknown force. How are we still so vulnerable? Tarlok's voice was cold but carried an edge of fear. We've fought wars against the greatest powers in the galaxy. Yet now, when we face this force, we are rendered helpless. An aide stepped forward, shaking his head. The systems are malfunctioning, Admiral. Power surges, gravitational shifts. Nothing we've encountered before. Our engineers are baffled. Whoever, or whatever, is behind this can strike without warning and with precision. Tarlok's expression darkened. Could it be the humans? They'd been making noise for years, but this... He trailed off, unable to put the thought into words. The idea that humans, mere upstarts in the grand scheme of the galaxy, could possess the means to cripple the Zentvar Empire was nearly impossible to accept. At the same time, across the galaxy in the Xylor Collective's Central Council, the same realization was dawning. The Xylor had long been regarded as the most technologically advanced race, their fleet unmatched in its ability to outmaneuver enemies. But as the latest disruptions hit their systems, panic began to creep into the heart of their leadership. "Report from the frontier," one of the advisors said, his voice quivering. "All systems are down. The fleets can't communicate. Their weapons are offline. We are flying blind." Their leader, High Chancellor Tylus, slammed his hand down on the table. "This is no accident. Who would dare target us? Who has the power to undo everything we've worked for in a matter of hours?" A young strategist, usually quiet and reserved, finally spoke up. "It has to be them. The humans. We were warned. We saw their rapid expansion, but we never thought they could do this. They've learned too much too quickly. And in the Korathi Federation, panic was spreading like wildfire. Entire colonies were left without power. Defense systems faltered. The once invincible Korathi fleets now scrambled to reestablish control, but no one knew where to start. Ships that had been hailed as the pinnacle of military engineering were now nothing more than stranded hulks in the blackness of space. "What is happening?" Grand Admiral Ferox asked, his voice strained. He had led his people to many victories, but now, standing on the edge of their greatest failure, he felt the weight of their vulnerability. The answer was the same across the galaxy: humanity. A species once regarded as insignificant was now a silent shadow hanging over them. Their technology, their ingenuity, their sheer will, everything about humanity was becoming a threat no one had been prepared for. For the first time, the galaxy's great powers feared the humans. They feared their silent strength, their ability to strike from the shadows, and their mysterious power to cripple even the most secure of empires. They had never imagined a species so small and so young could threaten to unravel everything they had built. And now, as the fear spread, one question loomed larger than all the others. How much longer could they ignore the rise of humanity before it consumed them all? The situation had reached a breaking point. In every corner of the galaxy, leaders convened in secret, their faces grim as they sifted through the wreckage of their once mighty empires. The Zenfar, the Xylor, and the Korathi had always prided themselves on their superior technology and military prowess, but now they found themselves helpless, reduced to scrambling for answers against a foe they had never considered a real threat: humanity. The Emergency Council of the galaxy's great powers convened on the neutral world of Zenthis, a massive, quiet planet at the edge of contested space. Zenthis had long been considered the center of diplomatic efforts between the major factions. It was here, in the heart of the galaxy's most intricate power structures, that a decision would be made. Would they unite against this unprecedented threat, or would they fall, each seeking refuge in their own weakened fortress? The council was a tight assembly of the most powerful leaders, all of them now staring into the abyss. Tensions were palpable, and whispers of despair filled the room. At the head of the table sat Emperor Karash of the Zenthar Empire, his massive form looming like an immovable mountain. Beside him, Chancellor Tylus of the Xylor Collective sat stiffly, his normally calculating face now worn with exhaustion. Across from them, Grand Admiral Ferox of the Korathi Federation clenched his fists, his sharp eyes burning with frustration. They had all arrived, not as allies, but as potential survivors, each with their own agenda, each leader hoping to protect their empire and their future. The doors to the chamber slid open, and Ambassador Caldwell of Earth walked in with a quiet confidence. Her presence alone seemed to freeze the air in the room. She was the only one among them, not scrambling, not desperate. She was the calm in the eye of the storm. She took her seat at the table without a word, her eyes steady, unfazed by the tension that clung to the air. The message was clear. The humans were no longer the weaklings they had once been perceived as. Emperor Karash was the first to speak, his deep voice resonating with authority. "We are here because we are out of options. Our fleets are broken. Our planets are vulnerable. This thing has thrown everything we've built into disarray. We must act." Ferox leaned forward, his voice tinged with anger. "We can't fight what we can't even see. This enemy is manipulating our systems, our very technology, without lifting a finger. We've been attacked without warning or provocation. And I'll say it plainly. It's humans. I believe it's them." Tylus shot him a sharp look, his thin lips curling in disdain. "The humans. You think they have the power to cripple the galaxy's greatest powers. They are a young species, Ferox. Undisciplined. A nuisance. They are nothing more than a distraction. Then how do you explain the facts?" Ferox retorted, his voice growing heated. "This distraction has turned your empire into a crippled shadow, Karash. My people are suffering the same fate. We were warned about them, yes, but we didn't believe they could do this. And now we know. Caldwell, who had remained silent up until now, leaned forward, her voice calm yet filled with an undeniable steel. You should have believed. You should have taken humanity seriously. For too long you viewed us as insignificant, as nothing more than children playing in a grown-up's world. But you've made a fatal error. You thought your power could shield you from the consequences of underestimating us. And now you're feeling the results. The room fell into a tense silence. The leaders exchanged uneasy glances, unwilling to admit the truth, yet unable to deny it. The fear of humans was not just the fear of an unpredictable force. It was the realization that humanity had the potential to reshape the entire galactic order. And they were doing so with terrifying precision and restraint. We need an alliance. Charash finally spoke, his voice thick with reluctant admission. We must combine our forces, or we risk losing everything to this threat. But Caldwell's response was swift, cutting through the desperation in the room. You don't need an alliance. You need respect. The question is not whether you'll survive. It's whether you'll acknowledge the truth. Humanity is no longer a fringe species, and if you wish to coexist with us in this galaxy, you must accept that fact. You will respect us, or you will face the consequences. The gravity of her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. For the first time, the great powers of the galaxy realized that humanity was not simply a rising star. They were the storm on the horizon. A storm that, once unleashed, would not be easily quelled. And in that moment, the galaxy's future was sealed. The choices they made now would determine whether they would face humanity's wrath or live under their shadow for all time. The council chamber was silent, save for the occasional murmur of disbelief. Caldwell's words lingered in the air, heavier than the stifling tension that seemed to suffocate the room. For the first time, the leaders of the Zenthar, Xylor and Korathi, realized that their comfortable positions at the top of the galactic hierarchy had been shattered. Their might, their vast empires, were no longer immune to the forces of change. And that change was human. Emperor Karash was the first to speak, his deep voice shaking with the weight of what had just been acknowledged. You speak as if humanity's power is unquestionable. But how do we know this isn't a fluke? How do we know that you have the strength to back up these threats? What proof do we have that your species has the ability to challenge us on equal footing? Caldwell's gaze met his, unwavering, her expression calm. You have seen the evidence. The disruptions to your fleets, the sudden power failures, the collapse of your communication networks. It was no accident. Those are not the actions of a fluke. It is the power of humanity, a species capable of shaping the very fabric of space and technology, capable of breaking what you thought was unbreakable. And it is only the beginning. Ferox's face was taut with frustration. What do you want from us then? You've crippled us. You've rendered us helpless. If you think we're just going to bend the knee, you misunderstand, Admiral. Caldwell interrupted, her voice as sharp as a blade. I'm not asking for your submission. I'm telling you that you no longer have the luxury of dismissing us. We have not come to destroy your empires, at least not yet. But you will respect us, and you will recognize our power. That is non-negotiable. We will no longer sit at the margins of the galaxy. We will be at its center. The room fell into a deep, praying silence. For the first time, humanity's rise was not a distant thought, or an eventual possibility. It was a reality they were forced to face, one that had already started to unravel the very foundation of their dominance. They had underestimated humanity's potential for too long, thinking that their superior technology and long-established empires would remain uncontested. Now they were seeing the results of that hubris in real time. Chancellor Tylus of the Xylor Collective, his thin features tight with a mixture of rage and helplessness, leaned forward. You cannot simply take the galaxy for yourselves. There are millions of lives at stake in the balance of power. If you continue to destabilize us like this, if you keep pushing us to the brink, we will fight back. And you won't like what you provoke." Caldwell smiled, but it was a cold, calculating expression. "I never said we wanted a war. I said you will respect us, and that respect will come through cooperation. If that's too much for you to handle, then we'll let the universe decide. But trust me when I say, the cost of underestimating humanity is far higher than you think." Her words hung heavy in the air. The threat was not spoken directly, but it was clear to everyone present. Humanity had positioned itself as the power they would now need to contend with. The question was no longer whether humanity would bow to the galactic powers, but whether those powers could adapt fast enough to survive in this new era. As the council dissolved, leaders departed in a storm of private thoughts and strategies. Some were ready to accept humanity's place at the table, grudgingly, knowing that resistance might cost them dearly. Others, however, would never accept such an idea without a fight. For now, the galaxy was teetering on the edge of an uncertain future, its power structures shaken to their core. Caldwell remained seated as the room emptied, her mind already turning to the next move. She had made her statement, but she knew that words alone wouldn't secure humanity's future. The galaxy was vast, and there were still forces that might seek to challenge them, forces that would need to be neutralized before true peace could be achieved. The game was just beginning, and humanity was no longer playing by anyone else's rules. The dust had settled, but the galaxy was forever changed. The leaders of the Zenthar, the Taxilor, and the Korathi had left the council chamber that day with heavy hearts, each one carrying the weight of their decisions. The meetings had been tense, full of accusation, fear, and reluctant acceptance. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had forced the galaxy's most powerful factions to acknowledge their existence. But now, the question was no longer about power or survival. It was about cooperation. Would the galaxy's old guard accept this new reality, or would they continue to resist the inevitable? Back on Earth, President Alexei Morrow stood before his advisors, watching as the feed from Zenthis, the site of the galaxy's most crucial diplomatic summit, flickered on the screen. Caldwell's bold words still echoed in his mind. Humanity was no longer just a footnote in galactic history. They had become a central player, whether the other powers liked it or not. "Is it really over?" one of Morrow's senior military strategists asked, his voice low, a hint of disbelief still hanging in the air. Did we really manage to turn the tide like that? Morrow leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Not over. Not yet. But the door is open. Caldwell has set the stage. Now we just have to make sure we're ready to walk through it." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. The room had been full of skepticism when the reprisal protocol was first conceived, a fail-safe meant to give humanity the edge if the galaxy's powers ever decided to turn against them. Now, the very protocols that were meant to keep Earth safe had become the foundation of humanity's dominance. But the road ahead was uncertain. While some of the galaxy's leaders had relented, others would never let go of the old order without a fight. The Zenthar Empire, still reeling from the effects of the mysterious disruptions, began rebuilding its fleets. Admiral Tarlok, though visibly shaken, was not one to bow easily. His people would recover, but not without scars. The Tyler Collective, too, had its share of rebuilding to do. Yet there was no denying the shift in their perception. Humanity was not an enemy to be ignored, but a force to be reckoned with. The Korathi Federation, meanwhile, had shifted to a more defensive posture. Grand Admiral Ferox, ever the pragmatist, was not one to waste time on pride. He had seen enough to know that the galaxy had changed, and humanity would play a pivotal role in the future. How that role would evolve, however, remained to be seen. And then there was Caldwell. As humanity's ambassador to the stars, she had achieved the unthinkable. But for her, the task was far from complete. Caldwell knew that while humanity had secured its place at the table, the real work was just beginning. Trust had to be built, alliances had to be formed, and the galaxy's fragile peace had to be maintained. But humanity's rise was not a journey without opposition. There were factions, rogue states, and unknown entities in the far reaches of the galaxy that would not simply bend to Earth's will. Caldwell had seen the signs. The galaxy was vast, and there were many unknowns still lurking in the shadows. But humanity had faced worse odds before. They had fought against the impossible, and they had won. As Caldwell stood on the balcony of Earth's Central Command, watching the stars above, she knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had shown its power, and now, with the weight of their history and their ambition, they would carve out a future, one they would defend at all costs. The galaxy had been given a choice: respect humanity or face the consequences. The choice was theirs.